down so that everyone can see, and we're going to get started, and then don't worry, we're not going to be in this room for very long. We're going to split up in a moment, but I'm going to hand over to Leo, one of our alumni, who's going to start us off for the evening.
Okay. Yeah. Welcome to the Institute of Ideas Debating Matters Competition's Northern Ireland multi-qualifying round. That was a mouthful, I don't want to say that again. As mentioned, my name is Leo Evans, an alumnus of the competition, currently a politics student at the University of Liverpool, and I was a Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate in May. So please don't feel too sorry for me, I've had it. So before I get started, I'm going to hand over to our fabulous hosts today who have given us a great facility. So if I can hand over to Liliana from Literature.
Hi there, thanks. Welcome to you all. It's wonderful to have everyone here. At Queen's, we love to host school competitions. It makes us jump for joy. At the Literafic, we think it's absolutely brilliant that we have the opportunity for you guys to all come along, because debating will help you a lot in your later life. And yeah, on behalf of the Literafic, please have a look at our term card that's plastered everywhere. So welcome to you all.
Thank you. So of course a big thank you to Literafic and to Queen's for hosting us. Also, we have to thank the competition's primary funders, the Wellcome Trust, without whom this competition simply wouldn't be able to happen. We run hundreds of qualifying rounds across the country, and they give a huge amount of support to us to do that. So for those of you who have never experienced debating matters, to put it honestly, it's like nothing you've ever seen before. Debating Matters has a focus that is more on the argument, it's more on making sure your argument stands up, and as a result, we don't have judges who are just passively standing around and watching. They're the ones actually questioning you. They're the ones who are quizzing you, making sure your argument holds up, and really holding you to account. This is because we believe that young people have real ideas that shouldn't be patronised, but should be treated on the same level as everybody else, and that's why we encourage that kind of debate. So it might sound a bit nerve-wracking, and I know any of you speaking tonight, I've been there. Yeah, if it was me, I couldn't eat for a day beforehand, it was awful. But I can trust you, the judges are just as, if not more nervous than you guys already are. So the winner from each room tonight will go through to the Northern Ireland and Scotland regional final, which this year is at the Lighthouse in Glasgow in March. That will be a full day of debating, where we'll have one winner who will represent Northern Ireland and Scotland at the national final in London later next year. We also tonight are looking for a best individual. So if you're not speaking, or even if you unfortunately go out early on, keep asking questions, keep getting yourself involved. With judges looking out, with individual judges looking out for one person who will go forward as the best individual to get a prize. Also, Debating Matters wouldn't run without us alumni. There are three of us here running the round tonight, all of whom have taken part in the competition before. There's myself, Joel, and where's Sarah? There's Sarah in the corner. All of whom got involved in the competition when we were at school, stayed involved, and now travel across the country organising and running rounds. So if you're in upper sixth and you want to get involved once you've left school, get in touch with either myself, Joel or Sarah, or the Debating Matters team. Speak to us tonight, or send us an email or on the Facebook page. Let us know you want to get involved as well. So I'll hand over to Joel, who's going to tell you where we're going.
Thank you very much, Leo. So I'm just going to explain the logistics of the evening. I'm going to start by explaining all the people who should stay in this room, so when people start moving, you're not going anywhere, just sit where you are. In this room competing, we'll have Dariada School, the Methodist College Belfast, Oak Grove Integrated College and St Columb's College, and judges Gary Adair, Leslie Edgar, John Thompson, Marie-Louise Sinnott and Gerard Hughes. And going over to the other room, so when I've finished, I'd like you to ask you to make your way down to the room you saw on your way in. Competing will be the Royal School Armagh and Cross and Passion College with judges Robbie Best, Sinead Doyle, Sally Montgomery, Joanne Mahaffey and Rochelle O'Hara. So if everyone would like to now make their way to the rooms that they'll be in for the evening.
Just a quick thing, it's all being recorded as well, just so you're aware, and that will be available on iTunes afterwards, just in case anyone wants to hear the debate again.
Okay, so I know it's a bit fraught, seemingly, to have so many people here at the start of a debate, but trust me, an audience like this can really help a debate. What we're here today to do is to debate in public. These students are here to engage you on subjects that they've been researching about, and we'll have plenty of opportunity for your questions, and as was mentioned, to claim the best individual prize of this room, which will be judged, and I'm just going to introduce this judge first, as they'll be watching our debates throughout the evening. Kyle Parks. Kyle, where are you? Give us a wave. He's sitting here at the front, who's a student and trustee of the Northern Ireland Youth Forum. Kyle is in his second year studying PPE, Politics, Philosophy and Economics, here at QUB, and is hoping to go on to a career in public policy. He's currently the UK Youth Ambassador for Northern Ireland, representing young people at a national and international level. He also sits on a trustee board of the Northern Ireland Youth Forum, which is itself, for those who don't know, a leading youth charity that encourages young people to participate in political and public life, and we're very pleased to have him joining us here today. Judging the first of our debates, and as this is the first one we're going to see, I'm going to quickly explain the format that we're going to be using, which might be unlike other debating competitions that you will have seen. All of our students will start with an introductory 3-minute opening speech, and these are going to be timed by me, and I've got my stopwatch here. I'm going to tap on the table at 2 minutes 30 to let you know you've got 30 seconds left. I'm not stopping you, I'm just letting you know you should be thinking about wrapping up. So we'll hear one speech for the motion, one against, a second for, and then a second against. Once we've heard those speeches, we're then going to go out to our panel of judges, and judging in this, our first debate, sitting closest to us, we have Gary Adair, who is a partner at Wilson Nesbitt Solicitors, where he specialises in criminal and civil litigation and human rights law. Gary graduated with a distinction from the Master of Legal Science course here at QUB, and joined Wilson Nesbitt in 2006. He was made partner in April 2015 and is a qualified solicitor, advocate, and is a member of the Mental Health Lawyers Association. He was also, once upon a time, a semi-finalist in the Irish Times debate competition in 2011, and we're very pleased to have him joining our panel today. Sitting in the middle of our judging panel, we have Leslie Edgar, who's the NICE, National Institute for Clinical Health and Excellence implementation facilitator here in Northern Ireland. She joined the team there October 2012, and her role is to be the local face of NICE, and in so doing encourage, facilitate and promote the uptake of NICE's guidance, advice and standards by all health and social care organisations. And for those of you who don't know who NICE are, they're the body who make many of the ethical decisions and financial decisions around the implementation of health and social care practice here in the UK. She's a pharmacist by profession and graduated from QUB and still practices as a community pharmacist today. She's previously worked for the Health and Social Care Board, where her role had been to develop the Northern Ireland Medicines Formulary, as well as heading up a team which provided all the prescribing information requirements the GPs across the region use in primary care. Apart from her pharmacy qualifications, she is a diplomate. I think that says diplomat, but spelt wrong. It is diplomate, sorry. Diplomate member of the Faculty of Public Health, and in 2012 she obtained a Master's in Public Administration qualifications from the University of Ulster, and we're really pleased to have her back with us. And sitting furthest, our third and final judge on this first panel, we have Professor John Thompson, who's Director of the Institute for Research in the Collaborative Humanities here at QUB, and is a Professor of English Studies and has previously worked as the Head of English at QUB for over 5 years. He's also been the Head of the School of Sociology, Social Policy and Social Work, and has a long biography that's included in is a very experienced judge too, and it's included in on the back of some of these sheets that are dotted around the room, so do have a look through that in more detail. I'm keen to move on, so I went through that quite quickly. Right, so we'll start with our opening speeches. We'll then come to our judges. We'll take one question from each of our judges, directed first towards the 4 team. The 4 team can respond to those questions, and they can have a kind of free-flowing exchange. And once that's done, we'll then ask our judges to move on to the against team. Again, we'll take one question from each of them for you boys, and you can answer them and have a back and forth. Once we've heard the speeches, we've had questions from our judges, we're going to come out to the audience for questions for our 2 teams. I'm also going to give you the opportunity to put questions to each other. And then we'll go out to the audience again. You'll finish with a final 1-minute closing statement, which is kind of 1 speech for, 1 against, 1 speech for, 1 against. And after that's done, the debate itself is over, and we'll ask for feedback, initial feedback from our panel of judges for both teams. So, is everyone clear on what's about to happen? Yeah? Speaking in this first debate, the television licence fee should be abolished. Joining us from Dariada, sitting closest to me and speaking first, we have Jack Hall, who's studying biology, chemistry, maths and English literature at AS level, and wants to go on to study medicine at Edinburgh in the future. Between running several clubs with the school, he's included in Dariada's debating society, and he enjoys simple things, it says here, such as lip syncing to Madonna's Material Girl in his bathroom mirror, which I don't know if that was one of your mates stitching you up, but I think our audience enjoyed it. Arguing alongside him will be Ben Kidd, who is studying chemistry, biology, maths and history, and hopes also to pursue a career in medicine in the future. He knows that hopes don't always come true, it says rather bleakly. But after all, it's 2015 and there are still no hoverboards. Can we please welcome the Dariada School? And arguing against them from the Methodist College Belfast, sitting closest to me we have Thomas Copeland, who's in lower 6th and is studying politics, history, music and French for his A-levels. He's the Secretary General of the Methodist College Model UN organisation and is currently preparing for a national conference to take place in 2016. He's joined by Jack O'Dwyer Henry, who's in the lower 6th also and is studying for his A-levels in mathematics, history, politics and Latin. Jack has always had an interest in politics and is a member of the Labour Party, a new join or a long-standing member, and the campaign for nuclear disarmament, so I'm sure has been watching the news keenly over the last few weeks. Can we please welcome Methodist College? Right, so Jack, if you'd like to start us off with your first 3 minutes on the subject, the television licence fee should be abolished, whenever you're ready.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to abolish the television licence fee, an annual £145.50 flat rate tax on all households that own a TV, which is used to fund the BBC. To put it simply, it is the proposition's belief that the pricing of this tax is unjust, while it is also unfair to market competition. It is our belief that this archaic system has lost its way, failing to remain fair and impartial in today's politically diverse landscape. And it is our belief that it must change to suit the needs of the digital age in which we currently exist. We, as champions of fairness and democracy, believe that we must abolish the television licence fee and replace it with a more modern subscription model. Firstly, I will explain why the television licence fee is inherently unfair. Indeed, it is unfair for the less privileged, unfair for competitors, and damaging for society as a whole. A flat rate tax of £145.50 seriously disadvantages those living in relative poverty, and many households struggle to afford this fee. And what happens to people who simply cannot afford this fee? Well, they are harassed and criminalised, victimised in their own homes, as the BBC can obtain and has obtained police search warrants to examine homes unannounced. Forget advertisements. This is certainly an unwelcome interruption to your Strictly fix. And on a more serious note, causes further expense to the taxpayer, who will pay for these cases to be taken through the court. Anyone unable to pay the fee would surely be unable to pay the maximum of a £1,000 fine, and so would face jail time. Surely you agree that these cases are also a huge waste of the court's time and resources. And this is not the only negative impact that the television licence fee is having on our society. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the BBC has failed to remain impartial in its broadcasting. At present, the BBC is in a unique position of being tax-funded, and therefore impartiality is key in maintaining an effective democratic society. The agreement which accompanies the BBC's Royal Charter, the document which provides the constitutional basis for the BBC, states that it must ensure that controversial subjects are treated with due accuracy and impartiality. However, the BBC has been heavily criticised most recently for its bias in both its news coverage of the Israeli airstrikes in Gaza and a panorama special on Jeremy Corbyn several days before the Labour leadership elections. It is important to note also that the BBC avoids regulation from Ofcom, unlike all other news broadcasters. All of this culminates to foster even more concern over whether the state-funded broadcaster can ever be truly as impartial as its founders intended. Biased broadcasting on a tax-funded service such as this is highly dangerous and attacks the basic principles of a free and diverse press that ensures a truly democratic society. I repeat, we the proposition are champions of fairness and democracy, and a fair democratic society would recognise the need to abolish the television licence fee.
Thank you very much, Jack. And the first speech against the motion, Thomas, whenever you're ready.
Ladies and gentlemen, you all of course will have heard the phrase, "He who pays the piper calls the tune." The reason for this phrase's longevity is that it embodies a timeless truth. Whoever finances the BBC controls all of its outputs and all of its services. The BBC provides a network of UK radio and TV channels plus their global channels and online service. In addition, the BBC itself is solely responsible for the material that these services provide, and they are world leaders in documentaries in particular. There is not one part of human, animal, global or even cosmic life that is not covered by the BBC's activities. As if these services themselves were not enough, all of their productions are underpinned by the BBC's stated public purposes, which are to sustain citizenship and civil society, to promote education and learning, to stimulate creativity and learning, to represent the UK and its nations, regions and communities, and most importantly of all, to bring the UK to the world and the world to the UK. These are ambitious and worthy purposes and are in turn set out in the Royal Charter, which acts as a constitutional basis for the BBC. The Royal Charter also sets out the oversight duties of the BBC Trust and the Executive Board, who represent us, the public, our public interests, and not somebody else's commercial interests. This makes the BBC a public service. And this is why the BBC continues to provide an independent public broadcasting service, making the BBC the envy of world broadcasting. The whole reason for this debate, of course, is that the Royal Charter expires in December 2016, and so the continued payment of the licence fee has become a very hot topic for debate. Jack and I believe that to remove the licence fee would force the BBC into private control with private money and private interests. Before I return to that argument, let's just take a step back to the basis, which is of course value for money. I've mentioned just a few of the BBC's wonderful services, so how much does it all actually cost? Well, it costs, as Jack said, £145 per annum per household. That's 40p per day for 4 people. Now, can anyone here honestly tell me about another service where you get so much for so little? Out of the near 5 billion that the UK spends every year, 66% of it is on TV output, 17% on radio services and the World Service, 11% on transmission and TV licence fee collection costs, and 6% on the BBC and the iPlayer, which the epitome of what the digital age stands for. Also, the BBC acts as a major employer in the UK and employs up to 20,000 people. So what else can actually compare to the BBC for money? Well, the simple answer is nothing. The cheapest that the Sky digital organisation offers is the original bundle, which is up to £240 per annum. The BBC provides a huge number of services at an amazingly low cost, but what else is good about the licence fee? Well, one of the most important and celebrated features is that the BBC is independent of commercial influences. Very little private money, and there are no ads.
I'm going to have to cut you off there, and I am going to have to
Thank you very
restrict, but thank you very much, Thomas. Ben, if we could have your 3 minutes, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, my colleague Jack has conveyed our contempt for the unjust system, which places a burden on some of the most vulnerable members of our society, while also highlighting the unfair advantage it allows the BBC over competitors and society as a whole. However, it is also our belief, as Jack has already stated, that changes must be made to suit the more modern age in which we currently exist. We are no longer experiencing the post-war period of great uncertainty that the founders of the BBC found themselves in when an obligatory licence fee began to be issued. In this time, following the closure of many amateur radio stations, the BBC was created to fulfil a position in an empty market with relatively no commercial competition. Moving forward to the present day, the media landscape has changed unrecognisably. The BBC now finds itself on a pedestal, above and detached from the rest of a fiercely competitive market. Clearly, the TV licence fee puts the BBC at an enormous commercial advantage. The licence fee, which makes the BBC nearly £3.5 billion a year, enables the BBC to dictate the market. However, this huge amount of additional income, while it breeds a culture of superiority, does not always equate to efficiency. We must challenge the BBC to adapt, and therefore the viability of the licence fee in modern day Britain must be assessed. Looking towards the future, there is no escaping the rapidly expanding technological landscape which shapes the wide range of media we consume every day. Marked by the emergence of online, on-demand services such as Netflix and Now TV, the digital age also forces us to reconsider the BBC's position. There are new and innovative broadcasting mediums available, and it is time the BBC reinvented itself, proved its worth, and asserted itself on a global scale. So what do we propose in order to bring about a better future for the BBC? A subscription fee. A subscription fee that will allow viewers to pay for what they want to watch, instead of all of us being subjected to an unjust fee that does not consider income, the TV we watch, or the amount of content we view. A subscription method of funding would create a much fairer system at heart, which caters to the specific needs of individuals. Furthermore, it would lessen the advantage the BBC holds over its rivals, evening out the market, and forcing providers to lower their prices in order to compete for customers. This method of funding would allow the BBC to honourably assert itself on a global level. This change to subscription must be made, and will certainly help move the BBC towards the digital age that we now live in. With a cross-party committee of MPs, headed by John Whittingdale, even reporting that by the next decade, a new system would have to be put in place as a result of the current system being anachronistic. It is clear that the fee is outdated, archaic, and obsolete. Indeed, this same group of MPs noted that the BBC is a powerful player, and unchecked, there is a danger that it will, by accident or design, crowd out smaller rivals and inhibit their growth.
I have to stop you there. Thank you very much, Ben. This final goes to you, Jack.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if we abolish the licence fee, it would have to be replaced by one of two things. Either the BBC would be funded through general taxation, or the BBC would have to become an entirely commercial broadcaster. To take the first of those, if the BBC were to be funded through general taxation, that would spell an end to the BBC's editorial neutrality. At the moment, the BBC's loyalties lie with the people who fund it. The people of Britain, the people who pay licence fees. However, if it were to be funded through general taxation, the BBC's loyalties would lie with the government. The BBC is far too important for its future to depend entirely upon the whim of the Chancellor every budget day. For example, in the Netherlands, their broadcaster recently moved from a licence fee-based system to being funded through general taxation. This led to a toxic mix of both funding cuts and governmental pressure upon the broadcaster. The other alternative to the licence fee is that the BBC is commercialised. This is indeed what a subscription fee would involve. Of course, there would again be a threat to the BBC's editorial neutrality, as it would be relying on advertisers and sponsors for its money. However, more worryingly, it would mean that the BBC's output would be determined entirely by market forces. Take local coverage, for example. BBC Northern Ireland has many local political radio and television shows. This is undoubtedly in the public interest. However, it commercially and economically would not work if the BBC were a commercial organisation. There are absolutely no commercial alternatives to the local coverage that the BBC provides. It could also lead to the BBC's coverage being dumbed down in the hope to create profit rather than in the benefits of public interest. For example, channels like BBC Two and perhaps BBC Four might not exist. There aren't commercial alternatives to those. If you want to see what the BBC's news coverage would be like in a commercial sense, look at Fox News in America. The BBC has to remain independent. And to remain independent, it can't be funded by the government and it can't be funded by private corporations and advertisers. If the BBC's output is to truly be in the public interest, then the decisions about that have to be not determined by market forces. The licence fee is the only method of funding the BBC that can ensure that the BBC's coverage is both independent and in the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've had two strong starts from our team there. And judges, I'm going to ask you to turn your attention first to Jack and Ben. If I could take your initial questions for them. John, starting with you if I can.
Oh, you want to start with Jack? Just one question to Jack? Or should I go
To the team.
The team, okay. Yeah, tell us about public service broadcasting. There are issues there, I think, about what constitutes a public service broadcaster and why we need one. I think that's a very interesting question. And also another question.
I'm just going to try and start with one for now, if I can. And Leslie, if we could take a question.
Right, public service broadcasting. Tell me about that fits your argument.
Sure. Leslie, can we have your question, please?
Yeah, I think you were giving some arguments there, but I want to know, as a TV watcher, why I should have to pay for something which I don't necessarily want.
Thank you. And finally, Gary.
Yeah, do you think making it more commercial would make the TV provider beholden to commercial interests rather than?
So do you guys want to deal with those questions in any order you see fit?
Okay, I think firstly we're going to address Leslie's point. You asked, as a TV watcher, why we should have to pay for content that we don't consume. That's really one of the main arguments behind our subscription model, because under the current TV licence fee, everybody pays the same flat rate tax, regardless of what content they consume, from the BBC, whether they listen to BBC Radio 4 or watch BBC One, whereas under a subscription model we're proposing that people could choose the content that they want to consume and pay for that as such. So I think really just the lack of choice is really under the TV licence fee as it stands, rather than our subscription model. Okay.
Well, I think next could we address Gary's question? You talked about would a move to commercial interest kind of harm the BBC as such, but I think the BBC moving to a subscription-based model, it would still be able to retain its similar what it has now at the moment in terms of Channel 4 and BBC 2 and things. It would just be that would be under a separate package, and you could choose if you wanted to buy, for example, the arts section of the BBC coverage, you could choose to pay for this. So in a way it wouldn't be that affected by commercial interests, I think, to a degree. It would allow the BBC the freedom to produce what they want to produce.
And I think one of the points that the opposition made was that under our model, the BBC would have to tailor its content to commercial companies and stuff, whereas we're talking about a subscription fee that people pay for. The BBC should be motivated to earn the money of people who are subscribing to the content by making good quality programs, rather than tailoring it towards
everyone being made to pay a fee.
Yeah, and
that they might not necessarily view the content of.
Yeah. And then if we just want to talk, John, and your question about a public service broadcaster, I think this really comes back to especially what the first speaker Thomas said about the public objectives of the BBC. You know, in the BBC, in the agreement which comes with the Royal Charter, it says that the public services of the BBC are to sustain citizenship and civil society, promote education and learning. We don't feel as if these objectives would necessarily change under a subscription model. We don't think that because you change the way the BBC is funded, that inherently has to change what the BBC is about or the BBC's identity. It's simply saying we are not going to force everybody to pay for content that they are not consuming. You know, so it doesn't necessarily have to change fundamentally.
Judges, do you want to come back on anything you've heard? Please, John.
I work for a publicly funded university. Are you going to? We're introducing a subscription model. We make you pay £3,700 to come here, but we can't educate you for £3,700. In the rest of the UK, it's £9,000. So why should we abandon our educational mission for commercial reasons when we are paid by people? You're talking about people who don't watch the BBC. I'm talking about people whose taxes pay for me to do my job, who never go to university. Why shouldn't those people pay that money to keep this great university open as a public service? And that's the analogy I would draw to the conversation. That's what I was trying to get at, actually. I didn't make it as clear as that when I probed you about what you thought of public service broadcasting.
Yeah, I would say that comes to the heart of our argument, the argument of choice. It's really just whether people, you know...
You have to be able to choose to pay if you want. I think that it's an unfair system if you're made to pay for something that you have no partake in under a subscription fee. You can pay for exactly what you want. The content that you want to watch is exactly what you pay for. If you don't want some content, you don't have to pay for it. And I think that's just a fairer system than the license fee.
The difficulty not, and it leads on from Jack's point, that everyone's going to choose to watch Top Gear and everyone's going to choose to watch our high-rating shows. And nobody's going to be listening to Women's Hour on Radio 4, and so those programmes aren't going to be commercial to make. And what's going to happen with your subscription model is that those lower rating shows are going to be very, very expensive to subscribe to the point where they're prohibitively expensive. Whereas if you have a flat rate licence fee, the BBC can support money losing programmes and also make high ratings programmes that are popular, not make that anymore.
I think really the point is that some programs that initially might not have been considered to be commercially viable in the sense of that they would make the BBC a lot of money, such as the Great British Bake Off, have really flourished and turned into something that has become commercially viable. It had over 15.05 million people watch the Great British Bake Off final, and that's kind of one of these niche market programs. Initially, it certainly was that you talk about. So it really, I still think there will be a commercial viability to these programs.
You know, where there's a demand, there's potential for it to exist commercially. You know, under our subscription model, we're not really saying that there has to be any change in the content that the BBC produces. We're simply saying that the funding and where it gets the money to produce the content is changing. That doesn't mean it's going to get any more or any less money than it originally did. And we're simply saying people should be able to have the choice. You know, it's really the heart of our argument that it's simply unfair to make people pay for things that they're not going to consume.
Okay. On that note, judges, I'm now going to ask you to turn your attention to Thomas and Jack, if I could take your 3 questions for them, and Leslie, starting with you if I can.
Yeah, I'd like to challenge you on your comment that you said that the BBC licence fee, the TV licence fee, is value for money, and you made a comparison to a Sky subscription. But at the moment, if I want, I have to pay for both. So it's not value for money, so I'd like to put that to you, and if you can clarify your argument in that respect.
Thank you. Gary, if we can have your question, please.
Mine's very simple. Do you accept that the licence fee as it currently stands requires any reform?
And finally, John.
Yeah, Jack raised the spectre of the BBC kind of going into cultural cringe at the whim of the Chancellor on Budget Day. But surely the independence of the BBC and the way the licence fee manifests itself, the government controls the BBC. It's a state-sponsored system. Though it's called independent because of the kind of naive view of democracy you have, because everybody pays a licence fee.
Do you guys want to deal with those 3 questions in any order you see fit?
Well, can I respond to John first? What I was trying to get at was that if the government were the sole funders of the BBC and the Chancellor had the powers over every single penny that the BBC had access to, then yes, that could be used as a political tool more than it is currently. And I think that there's certainly a case, as I pointed out, the example in the Netherlands, that there is a very high risk that if the government were the sole funders of the BBC, that independence editorially would be lost.
I'd like to just answer Leslie's question about paying for more than one service. I completely understand, obviously, many people don't find everything they want in the BBC, but what is unique about the BBC across the market is that it truly does, in my opinion, offer something for everyone. And if you removed, say for example, you only decided to pay for Sky, by not having BBC there, you've removed so many of your other needs or requires. For example, if you might go to Sky for Sky Sport, but then you might get a bit of sport from Sky Sport, but then you want something from Sky Original. So you're paying a little bit from Sky Sport, a little bit from Sky Original, a little bit all over the place. Whereas with the BBC, although I completely understand it doesn't offer everything, it offers something for everyone, something which so many of these other organisations under a subscription model just don't offer.
And I think I think it's unfair to compare Sky subscription to the licence fee, because the licence fee is not just paying for television channels, it's paying for the BBC's online resources, for the BBC's radio programmes, for the local coverage, and so I think that seeing as it's paying for a lot more and it's cheaper, I'd say it would be much better value for money.
And then the last one from Gary was that Jack and I don't necessarily agree that there is no need for reform. I mean, all institutions which have lasted for so long always require reform. And we completely understand that the way in which the licence fee works may not be quite perfect, but the concept of the licence fee or the ideology behind it we completely support. We do agree that there may be a few tweaks here and there just to make it a little bit more streamlined. We do not necessarily block any sort of reform saying no, don't touch this is perfect as it is. Nothing is perfect, and the BBC licence fee system isn't quite perfect, but we agree in broad strokes that it is a much better alternative than either moving to a general tax system or a subscription model.
Yeah, to follow on from that, I would say that all forms of taxation have their imperfections, but in terms of the licence fee, it is the least worst option.
Judges, do you want to come back on anything you've heard?
Yeah, you spoke, you think it does need reform. What do you think we should do?
Well, let me see.
Your favourite one?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I think for a start, over 75s do not have to pay the licence fee as it currently is, and I think that demographic can sometimes be better off than younger people. So I think that maybe reconsidering that age, or if there should indeed be that line should be drawn at 75 or at another age. I think that something like that should be looked into and actively reviewed.
Can I ask you about the Charter Review as an opportunity to reform? It's really following up on that question. The Charter Review, I'm afraid, I've been involved in it a bit, and it looks like BBC are going to cut some of the services that you think are so essential for a public service broadcaster. Which raises for me the question, is the licence fee really linked to public service broadcasting?
Well, I would argue that if the public is paying for the BBC, then the public will have a huge amount of control over the BBC. And whilst I do understand that some of these services, like pure economic events, may no longer be viable, if the public is paying for the BBC, they're going to have much more control over its output than if the government was paying for the BBC or select members of the public were paying for the BBC.
And while perhaps the public service aspect of the BBC may be decreasing and maybe we're coming under pressure, it is still certainly a much more active and much larger part of the broadcaster than any other commercial competitor.
Okay. On that note, audience, I'm now going to open it up to you. Who has questions for our two teams? Yeah, one in the back. And I'm going to ask you all to say your name and school before you ask a question so that Kyle at the front here knows who everyone is asking those great questions. Yeah. A bit louder if you can. Hi.
Talk about your subscription fee model that would still be under the control of either BBC as a public limited corporation or a different company that has acquired over. If, like for example, people who subscribe to Sky do not own Sky, they just pay for Sky. Like it's still owned by these guys. So if the BBC was to not be funded by the SFB, it would be funded as a private interest that tries to make as much profit as possible, and therefore may engage in bias broadcasting and give more views.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Yeah. Louder, yeah.
Ben O'Kane at this college. You suggest, the Gary School suggested that under the subscription fee service, BBC would not make any less money. However, to begin your opening speeches, you suggested that the licence fee is explicitly unfair to those who are less well off. If you expect those who are less well off to pay less, then how on earth are you going to account and make the same amount of money that you would under the licence fee where everyone pays a fixed rate?
Yeah. Do we have questions for Methodist College? They do want to get rid of the BBC, this thing that we've all grown up with. Yeah.
Michael Haggerty from Collins College. Just like to ask, what would you think of a system where people pay a different amount depending on what their annual income is?
Sure. And over here, was that a question for? Yeah.
David Lindsay, Belfast School. This is to Jack, or to Jack Methodist. You said the BBC produces your speech. I almost quote. You said the BBC produces the BBC produces the sort of content that is for the benefit of the public interest. But at the start of most episodes of Top Gear, it says the BBC produced Top Gear. So do you believe it was right for the BBC to fund products and antics such as going to Vietnam with motorbikes under the American flags, which was quite possibly one of the most nicest things they've ever done?
Thank you. More questions. I'm going to try and take as many as I can. Yeah, here.
Lara Adam. You said that, Thomas, in your speech, you said that one of the aims of the BBC, I think, was to bring the word to the UK and the UK to the world. People outside the UK can't access the BBC whatsoever, whereas commercial companies such as Sky, people that subscribe to Sky, they can subscribe to Sky all over the world.
Thank you. More questions? Come on, yeah.
Jack Meehan, Collins College. Just for Daliana. I think that most Western democracies have an independent public broadcast company, PBS in America, and it is, for want of a better word, a useful tool for the government or a lever, as it's called, for changing public opinion, and it really can be helpful for government to work cohesively. And I'd like to question how would you replace that? What else could the government use instead of that?
Sure. Okay, so I think we've got quite a lot on the table for now. I'm going to come out to the audience again later though, so save your questions for our next round. Dariada, do you want to answer the questions that have been put to you first?
I'm not sure. I didn't get the surnames. I think there were two Bens in the back row. Is there two Bens? Can I speak to the first Ben? You said that the...
you can speak to the whole room if you want.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll address my point to the first Ben. The subscription fee model, you were saying that it wouldn't be... it would be owned as a private company. And I think you were kind of like... You were targeting our point that we were saying that... the BBC would be motivated to create high quality content due to the fact that it's reliant on public money. You know, people from subscription fees from the public, and this is the point that we just want to reiterate. Any commercial company is motivated by profit. Therefore, in order for the BBC to obtain more subscriptions and more subscriptions to the service, they're going to be motivated to create more quality content. We don't think it's an issue that they're not publicly owned. We think the BBC can exist as a private company and still make fantastic fantastic quality.
Fantastic quality.
And then
I think I'd like to respond to the second Ben's question. Well, I think it was a Ben as well. I'm not sure of the surname, fortunately. You were talking about how the BBC would be losing funding as a result of less well-off people not being able to pay for a subscription fee. But to a degree as well, as we've already said, under the current system, the license fee does not allow the BBC to produce content and sell it to a worldwide audience. Under a subscription fee, they would be capable of opening up to a worldwide audience, and then a worldwide audience would obviously mean more people are buying the subscription fee, so you wouldn't really have that much of a reduction in funding.
Yeah, I would agree. And then the last point is to Jack at the back there. You described the BBC as really just any public service broadcaster as a useful tool of the government, but we don't really believe that it should be used by the government. We believe that it should be independent in all matters. I'll actually just refer back to the part of the BBC.
It should be free from political bias, and that's kind of what you're suggesting, that the Western democracies are using it as a method of political influence, and I don't really think that's right or fair.
Yeah, it's really a point that the opposition have failed to address, the point of political bias. They haven't really responded to it in any way thus far, but we just don't believe that it should be used as a political tool.
Okay. So it's all right. You're going to have the opportunity to put things directly to each other in a moment. But first, Methodist College, do you guys want to deal with the questions that have been put to you?
I'll deal with the question. I didn't catch anyone's name, sorry. But proposing that there was that there were bans to the license fee and that people paid depending on their income. Well, first of all, if the BBC is to remain completely independent, it has to, collect the money by itself without the government's assistance, and of course the government would be the only body that would actually have the appropriate information regarding people's incomes. And by everyone paying the same amount of money, it sort of establishes a direct link, a symbolic almost link, between what everyone is paying and then the service that is being received by everyone. Of course, if it was if the fee depended upon someone's income, that means that more well-off people would be bigger funders to the BBC, so therefore the BBC would have to tailor their programmes in the interests of the people who are giving them more money. The licence fee, for the lowest 10% of income, the licence fee will only ever represent about 1% of someone's income. So it isn't a considerable amount of money, and indeed in recent years the licence fee has actually dropped while other prices of different household goods and services have been rising. So it represents very good value for money, and of course we don't want to live in a society where someone or a family can't afford a £145 a year licence fee. But the way to deal with poverty is not by changing the BBC, it's by raising wages, it's by ensuring that there's decent welfare provision.
Yeah, I'd like just to answer Lara, I think it was, question in particular about global viewers. Actually, recent reports suggest that more than 250 million people tune into the BBC global news service every week, and that's a report that came from an organisation called the Global Audience Estimator. And the global news service consists of the World Service, World News, and the BBC News website. And that 250 million people represents 1 in every 28 people in the world who regularly use the BBC's services. About 80 years ago, the BBC Empire Service began broadcasting, and its successor is the World Service, reaches about 192 million people around the world, all the way from Libya to Peru and right back to London. And in many places in the world, the BBC World Service represents the only non-state controlled network for information that's available to them. And a lot of people argue that this World Service represents the UK in a favourable light. I mean, it's very hard to deny that the UK has almost a reputation of the mother of parliament, a bastion of free speech. And what the BBC can represent is the country in which citizens are. I will finish up very quickly. But this World Service is very important for a global branding, and that it portrays the UK in a very, very good light, and there are very few positive brands like the BBC.
Okay, so I'm now gonna sit back a little bit and let our two teams confront each other directly. So Jack and Ben, can I have a question from you that you can put to your opposition?
Oh, a single question?
A single question.
Okay. We'd just like to ask, may I?
Yeah.
I'd just like to ask the opposition why they feel that the licence fee is still justifiable after we've raised the point that nobody should really be forced to pay for content that they're not consuming, as is today. I don't think you've really justified that whatsoever, and that is
the heart of our argument.
Well, I would contest that the BBC is not necessarily the same as Sky or any sort of commercial broadcaster. It is a public service. The same way people pay for the NHS, yet don't necessarily go to hospital. The same way people pay for universities, yet don't go to university. The same way people pay for schools, yet they're adults and they no longer go to school. I think that the public service that the BBC provides in terms of providing really good quality news programmes, in terms of holding government and politicians to account, that's a public service. And while people may not appreciate that, while people may not necessarily watch those programmes, it is a public service, and I think people should have to pay for that service.
And I'd just like to reinforce, I believe, a statistic that Jack mentioned earlier, that 97% of the people in the UK use the BBC every week. So it's not as if there's vast swathes of the population that are paying for something they're not using. Nearly the entirety of the population is using the BBC services every single week.
Do you guys want to come back on them?
Well, you mentioned how 97% of the BBC public use the BBC, but that has no implications as to how much of the BBC they use or what aspects of the BBC they use. Under a subscription fee, you would pay for exactly the amount of content you watch, and this just doesn't exist under your flat rate tax.
This is just this part of our argument is just all about choice, and you really haven't addressed that.
Well, tax is not about choice. Tax is about paying for what is in the interests of society. Tax is about paying for what is for the greater public good, even if the individual paying that tax doesn't necessarily realise that. But we think that the majority of people do realise that why all taxes are paid.
To add on a practical level, I wouldn't say that a subscription model would work. For example, I'm not only interested in arts and culture. Mostly am, but occasionally I'll watch sport or something. Occasionally I'll watch sport. But I don't want to be inhibited. One day I might decide that I want to watch a rugby match or some other ludicrous display of sport like that. But and a subscription model shouldn't stop me from doing that. And I believe your subscription model would block off entire aspects of culture and society from some members of the population.
Okay, so you guys have put questions to Methodist. Do you want to put questions to Dariada? One question.
Okay. Well, my main problem with your subscription model is that it would, at the end of the day, be a private company owned by private individuals. For example, the same way Sky News is owned by Rupert Murdoch. And how can you be sure that a private company and a privately owned news and media organisation won't act in the interests of that private company and not in the interests of the public?
Well, I think this is an argument that we've already talked about. The company would essentially be dependent upon subscription fees from the public. Therefore, it's within their interest to maximise profits, and therefore it's within their interest to please the public by making high quality content. And the BBC is already biased in many aspects. It's that we've already thoroughly talked about its political bias, which you still haven't really challenged whatsoever. So it's not as if the BBC is
free from political bias as it is at the moment. It still has its issues already. So as a private company, I don't really see how it's going to be any different from the way it is at the moment.
Yeah. Do you guys want to come back on them?
Well, first of all, as a private company, it wouldn't be solely relying on the subscription fee payers. There would also be advertisements, and it would have to, appease advertisers in multiple cases of, advertisers exerting influence over newspapers and media outlets. In terms of political bias, we don't believe that there's any systemic effort within the BBC to get a certain party elected. We think that while there may be individual cases of something being reported in a certain way, there are cases that balance it out. There are cases on one side of the political spectrum, cases on the other, and that there's no evidence that there's any systemic bias towards one party or one political opinion or another.
As there are with many newspapers, for example, which are based very much upon external commercial interests.
Well, I think your suggestion that the bias is going to even out, that kind of assumes that every person watches equal amounts of kind of BBC content and equal amounts of political bias towards either direction, but rarely is this the case. So the suggestion that having bias one way and then the other balances it out isn't true, because someone might not necessarily watch both sides of the story.
Yeah, and you kind of said that every other news outlet is accused of political bias, and the BBC is kind of like no different from that. But the BBC is paid for with taxpayer money. The difference. You would absolutely expect any other kind of news broadcaster to have political bias, but the BBC is paid for by a tax. And therefore, it's within the agreement of the Royal Charter that it should be it should ensure that controversial subjects are treated with due accuracy and impartiality. And your argument that the BBC is not biased, we've actually provided evidence of cases in which it has, whereas you've provided.
I'm now going to throw it back out to the audience. The point was made. Right, I let that go on a little bit long because it was interesting. Quick contributions from the floor. Yeah, here, name and school. Quick as you can. Louder.
David Connors in College. Whilst the BBC does have bias in over routine, but there's a bias where it's only in certain extreme cases. There is still a vast plethora of content on the BBC which is going to flourish because of the licence fee that's introduced. So, as a youth, I believe that this allows me to absolutely engage with an education standpoint with so much local language like the BBC Radio 4 in there, and no show politics or whatever. And it allows me to such play well this from the
Thank you. More questions, please. Yeah, at the very back there. Yeah. Loud as you can. We can't hear you up here. We're competing with the window that's keeping us all cool.
Giving Kelby from Dalriada School, my questions to the opposition. One of you mentioned that the licence fee puts BBC in interest to society, but actually there was a poll, I think it was by the Telegraph, a few years ago, that showed 70% of people wanted the licence fee abolished. So no matter how much people love the BBC, you're missing the point that in the interest of society, the fee should be abolished.
Yeah, and there was a hand next to you. Yeah, loud.
Hello, Benedict Amster, also from Dalriada School. I'm someone who chooses not to pay the licence fee and chooses not to own a TV. However, in the 12 years since I and my family made this choice, we've been sent dozens of threatening letters, faced demands to search my home, and had baseless accusations yelled to my face on my doorstep. I'm treated as if I'm already a convicted criminal. This is legalised, institutionalised harassment. And my question is simple. How can you justify this? And how can you state that this is preferable to the system's subscription model under which I can pay for what I choose to view?
Thank you. Final question here, because we haven't heard from you yet, and then I'm going to bring it back to the audience. Yeah, name and school.
Jack Higgins from Royal College. I had to come back there to the question I asked before. Boston Group just kind of tarnishing everything saying Boston government influence in media is wrong. In fact, what I meant was that certain issues, for example, domestic violence, loneliness, drug abuse, are dealt with in the BBC and other broadcasting companies, broadcasting companies and other companies, in the way that Channel 4, ITV, things that are influenced by commercial interests really aren't, they don't deal with these problems. This is what I mean. It's not partisan influence, it's in the interest of society, it's in the interest of us all, whether we watch it or not.
Okay, thank you very much. So, I'm going to now ask you to come back for your final minute, your final summation. It's completely up to you what you want to do with that minute, but I'd advise you all, and for everyone else speaking in these debates today, to kind of deal with one point. It's not a lot of time, right? Make one point that you think is going to help bring together the sum total of your argument and bring together all of the discussion of your position that we've had today. So starting in the order that we originally started in, Jack, if you'd like to start us off. I'll tap the table when you're halfway through at 30 seconds again.
I shouldn't take it. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have explained how the BBC licence fee is an archaic and outdated in the context of today's market. The opposition has clearly ignored the choice argument that we put, of course. I mean, Benedict in the back has mentioned people are being harassed for not paying the licence fee. This is just absurd. And then to propose that we should only make minor changes towards the Royal Charter. Things like, we should charge over 75-year-old people because they're economically better off. First of all, I challenge you for the evidence for that. And then second of all, I would say that older people are on their pensions and they're, I just don't think that's accurate. There seems also to be the idea that the BBC will have to make a change in content, whereas we think the only change in content will be an increase in quality, because the BBC are forced to compete commercially, are forced to compete for their subscription fees, because
Thank you very much. I have to stop you there. Thank you very much, Jack. Thomas, your minute, please.
I'd like to start off by apologising profusely on behalf of the BBC to Benedict in the back. I am very sorry that you've been harassed in such a way, and I really, I don't know what to say. All I can say is that if 97% of the population is paying the licence fee, there's a very small majority, very small minority that are treated the way you are, and I don't have a lot to say to you, I'm afraid, so apologies on behalf of the BBC. I'd just like to finish by saying that the BBC is trusted around the globe to be public-spirited and accurate, and trust in large institutions like the BBC is very, very rare, and to lose our control of the institution with the heritage and quality and trust of the BBC would be a catastrophic mistake. And that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you very much. Ben?
Well, I'd like to start, I think, again by addressing Benedict's point. The fact is, under a subscription model, this kind of thing simply wouldn't happen. Under the license fee, it does. Regardless of whether it's 3% or not, it's still unfair and unjust, and we need to move away from it. In today's modern democratic society, such harassment of innocent people is just completely wrong, frankly. And in addition, again, I'd just like to reiterate the fact that we keep coming back to this. The quality of the BBC content will by no means be reduced by turning to a subscription fee. They still have to produce quality content in order to appeal to the market and in order for people to want to purchase the content. You can purchase whatever you want to watch, and this just doesn't exist under the license fee because you're made to buy all the content regardless of whether you view it or not, and that's just unfair.
Thank you very much, Ben. Jack, again, the final word is yours.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to counter Jack's point that the quality of the BBC would somehow increase if it was entirely prone to market forces. At the moment, the BBC is still in competition with commercial channels for views, and it's not as if it doesn't compete against those channels. The core of our argument is that the licence fee is paid by people. So therefore the BBC's priority is with the people of the UK. The BBC's priority is with their public interest. If it is privatised, the BBC shall work for private corporations, it shall work for private companies, and the way that the rest of the media works. And I think it would be it's quite refreshing to have at least one media outlet that isn't there for the corporations, and it is working there for the people and for the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, everyone can breathe a sigh of relief. The first debate is over. Judges, if I could turn for you, if I could ask you to give your feedback first to Jack and Ben, and then separately we'll do Thomas and Jack about kind of what you thought, the substance of their arguments were and kind of comments you have for them. John, if we can start with you, please.
I kind of think you didn't do the subscription thing as well as you should have. I think you could have justified, or you should really have conceded that subscription means working in a commercial environment and unpopular programs just have to go. Somebody else can do the unpopular program, some local TV station or something, because your subscription model sounded too much like a TV license fee. And I'm surprised in a way that you give you a hard time from this side, that you were basically wanting a license fee by another route. And you were kind of getting at that, the team were kind of getting to you about that when you talked about it. And also, I think the Benedict thing, which you were delighted about, this idea of classic. I mean, there's a huge number of defaulters on paying a license fee, and the BBC is moving into the digital age, and with the charter renewal, Benedict's family are still going to get knocks on the door, and if they're watching any form of digital broadcast on an iPhone or anything else, they're going to be prosecuted. So, you know, there is a kind of issue here about what a public service broadcaster does, why the fee is needed, and you could deny that, but I think you didn't quite get that subscription model quite right. That was the big weakness, I thought, in your argument. I thought you were really good at coming back, these other guys, but I thought the subscription model was a bit of a fault.
Thank you. Leslie, your feedback, please.
Probably one more general comments. I thought you actually had good thought processes, both to the questions and your original debating, and you had quite clear messages about what you wanted to get across, and good counter arguments then as well to Methodist College questions. I would say as well, you look like you're enjoying the debate. You look like you are. Need to be careful with your timings. Okay. But also you good use of summing up based on the audience questions that they pose to you.
Thank you. Finally, Gary.
Yeah, I had put that to you all, that you all need to be careful with your timings. Remember, when speaking out loud, the main things I hear, the first thing you say and the last thing you say, so if you get cut off midway, you've lost one of your better points. You focused a lot on the political bias of the BBC, and you did throw out a couple of examples. I didn't think you established it well enough to focus on it as much as you did. And I think part of that was because you spent a lot of time on the subscription model, which I think is a very dangerous, pinning your colours to the mast too much. You're here to knock something down. The TV licence should be abolished. You don't really need to say what we're going to put in its place. You can say there are a number of options for doing that, and that gives the other side less to attack. And
Sorry.
So you guys are going to be using this room much longer? We've got a book now from 6 to 10.
I don't think we have, but can we finish very quickly what we're doing and then we'll come have a chat? Yeah, Gary, finish us. Sorry.
I agree with Jack. The other side then didn't attack you enough on that, but if you pin your colours so closely to a particular solution, which you don't have to do, then you leave yourself very open to attack. Yeah, and I just thought, that would have given you more time to hammer home on the criminal prosecution aspect of it, the fact that the licence fee is not means tested, and areas you didn't touch on, like, not very much, recent BBC scandals or recent issue of Jimmy Savile, things like that, that really leave us feeling that the BBC is just this terrible organisation. Of course the licence fee has to go, and that, but I did think you argued very well in your
Gary, could I ask you to start us off in our feedback for Methodist College Belfast?
Yeah. I'd start with a really good point. You answered the questions very, very well. You were very good in the back and forth with the audience, with ourselves, with the other side. I thought some of your best points came out in the back and forth, which really should have been front and centre in your opening. The fact that it is a public service like the NHS, like universities, like schools, brilliant. Tax isn't about choice. We have to pay taxes for things that we don't like because it's for the greater good. Those are all points that were, certainly they weren't before in your opening, which was slightly more about how great the BBC is in general terms, which you did have to do, but these sort of wider issues are important as well. And again, they pin their colours to the mast of the subscription model, which has really serious problems with it. It'll move them over to a sort of ratings-based type situation, and so it could have been attacked probably a lot more. I also think in terms of reform, you could accept some of the issues to undermine their points. You could accept that it is a disgrace that people are criminally prosecuted whenever they're not criminally prosecuted for not paying tax, for example. That would be through civil courts and things. So, accepting that it needs some reform gives you a bit more wiggle room in terms of what they're attacking about.
Thank you, Leslie.
I thought you had great teamwork working together. When you were doing your opening, I think you had a lot of opinions in there rather than facts. But when you went back to the counter arguments, you were very factual, so that your progress improved as you went along. In contrast, the others, you look very serious, the two of you. So that's a good thing or not, I don't know. So I think you had good counter arguments and some very strong position statements as well.
Thank you. And finally, John.
Yeah, I thought you were very good. I thought you kind of came through. I agree with Gary. You came through when you were responding better than when you were proposing, putting in the opposing emotion. This question of the independence of the BBC is a bit of a worry. The BBC is one of the greatest commercial organisations we've got. It sells books, it sells programmes internationally. It makes a massive amount of money commercially, and I don't think that really dealt with the question of its independence and the horrors of commercialisation. They're there already. That's how it survives. And who monitors its independence? In a democracy, a government monitors the independence of a public service broadcaster, and that creates all kinds of problems. So I thought you could have been a bit, the charter reform is a great opportunity for you to do what Gary was saying, to concede certain things are wrong and need to be corrected, but it's the best we've got. And I thought that point didn't quite get through.
Okay. Judges, I'm not asking you to go away to find a quiet spot, perhaps in the corridor, away from our friends who want to get into this room and aren't getting in. To go decide who you think has won that debate, and then when you're out the room, in here we're going to have a just for fun audience vote, because these issue matters, right? Charter reform is completely on the table, and what the shape of the BBC is totally up for discussion in the United Kingdom today. So it's just for fun. The people who are making the decision about the debate are out of the room at the time we're taking a vote. They're going to decide, but we want to see from you. Who convinced you? Do you think? And vote with your conscience, not with your mates, because we know who your mates are. But we want to know what you think. Do you think Dariada School convinced you that the television licence fee should indeed be abolished? Hands down. 9. Can I see a show of hands against those who think the television licence fee should not be abolished? That's 16. So the room has it with Methodist College Belfast, but we'll wait and see what our judges think. Can we please thank all of our students for a really brave and engaged debate. Don't go anywhere. Okay, so our judges are back in with their decision. Judges, do you have a spokesperson, someone who can announce the decision, give us.
Yeah, I'm going to give.
So, John, if you want to give us the reasoning behind the decision first, and then holding suspense as long as possible. Tell us
Please
what you think on that debate.
I can't do this, guys.
Yeah, it's a bit like the X Factor. We thought it was a cracking debate. We thought there were lots of things going on in it that were interesting, and we were watching our future leaders really. Thank goodness we've got great speakers. We commend you very much, all of you, for your speaking. You certainly spoke up better than the audience sometimes spoke up, so that was good. And we did feel very strongly that you've done some homework and you've got things to say. Some of you were saying things that you possibly didn't understand a little bit, but others were you worked as teams. Both teams it was a joy actually to see you working as teams, and also to see personalities emerge. And it came down to the question that Joel had instructed us on just before we started, which was, this is a competition which isn't really about charisma and personality, it's about content and about who has marshalled the best arguments in the best way and who has, in a sense, convinced us. And in the end, we did talk quite a bit about it and went to and fro, and we all analysed our notes. You see, look at the notes I've got. I don't really write very much. I have notes all over the place. And if you look here, my colleagues are the same. We've all got lots of notes. We could now debate. Actually, if you wanted us, we could debate it too. And it'd be very interesting to hear what the audience thought of who won the debate. But we, I think, in the end, felt that it was massively won the debate. But we would like to commend Dalriada very strongly. You enjoyed the debate more, and we enjoyed you very much. So you guys were speaking, they were the BBC basically, on behalf of the BBC you were apologising. So I kind of thought that was interesting, but it was the cut and thrust of responses that in the end I think we felt a lot of content was coming out there in response. Lots of weaknesses, but lots of strengths in both teams, but we did think we got by a squeeze.
So can we please have commiserations to Dalriada and also congratulations. Okay, so Methodist College will be seeing you in the final debate after our tea break a bit later. Dalriada, I do hope you stick around and get stuck in with contributions from the floor and perhaps get your hands on that Best Individual Prize later today. Could I now ask you to clear off and the next group of students to come up? First speaker in the middle.